Dylan,
like,
did you see the shit that I posted in the chat yesterday about the fucking cinnamon roll dough ice cream that I ate?
No, I missed that.
It was incredible. It changed the fucking game. Cookie dough ain't shit.
Them's bold words.
I know. I mean them. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Backstage Gaming, dramatic takes on your favorite games. I'm Chris.
And I'm Dylan.
And we have a special treat for all you in listener land today because we have a guest for the first time. Hi, guest. Say your name.
Hello, I'm JP.
This is JP. JP just
What?
put on the sultry
We have
voice.
a guest.
Yeah, JP is here. JP is a friend of ours from college. He directed us in a couple shows. We worked together on things. JP's fun people. JP, introduce yourself to the lovely listeners out there.
Okay, so I was about to say I knew them from college, but Chris stole my intro there.
Yes.
But so yeah, I knew Chris and Dylan in college. We did a few shows together in the theater world, which I started with. Now I live in Washington D.C., visiting Chicago for a few days, performing at Chicago Sketch Fest here. I've been into the comedy scene in DC for a while and heard this podcast. Thought, hey, theater and video games, that's a really interesting idea. I bet you could relate sketch comedy and video games too.
And so that's what we're going to do. Also, please forgive, JP is here in Chicago with me. I have but one microphone because microphones are expensive and I work at a grocery store. So if there's level weirdness, I'm going to do my best in editing to make this nice and smooth and pretty. But if there's any points where, like, either JP or I are quieter than is desirable, we're, like, sitting next to each other and leaning in when it's time to talk. So, forgive any technical foibles. Dylan, anything new with you since we talked literally 2 days ago to record the last episode?
Not really.
I mean, the only new thing really is that we're all undergoing Snowpocalypse, but
Yeah.
So
We all kind of got crap throat.
Except, so here's the thing. As mentioned, I work at a grocery store. That's my day job. They were anticipating a big snowstorm to hit really the entire country over the last few days, but it was supposed to roll into Chicago last night. Mm-hmm. Yesterday, there was not room to move in my store.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Crammed with people doing, like, pre-storm shopping preparation, and, like, it was the busiest I have ever seen it. And I jokingly mentioned to someone, I was like, oh, you know what this means? This means we're gonna get all of, like, 3 inches of snow. Guess how much snow we got?
How much snow did you guys
It's
get?
about 3 inches.
Oh my god.
Like, maybe a little more where it drifted, but, like, not much. It's, it's a good snowfall, but it's not apocalyptic in the way that everyone was saying it was going to be.
Okay. That is comforting for me because we're supposed to be in the thick of it now. And while it is certainly lighter than what we were anticipating, I would still say it's going to be more than 3 inches. So hopefully it won't be as bad as we're fearing. But, like, it would be really nice if it was as light as you were saying.
Yeah. Who knows? Apparently, in my girlfriend Alex's hometown, all of the weather people were, like, completely confused because there are two different, like, I don't know shit about meteorology, but there are apparently, like, two different models that are frequently used to try to predict things like this. Mm-hmm. And one of the models was predicting no snow, and the other model was predicting, like, 30 inches. And all of the meteorologists were just like, I don't fucking know.
Let's go with the safe option.
Yeah. Enough about the weather. Wow. So, like JP mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about sketch comedy this week. And so I'm going to turn it over to JP to sort of walk us through,
to sketch us an image, if you will.
Yes. Just draw us a sketch of what sketch comedy is.
Draw a picture for all you listeners out there. Yeah, perfect. So when I say I do sketch comedy, the first thing people always say is, oh, where you go up and tell jokes with a mic. And then I'm like, no, that's not it.
That's a
completely
completely different
routine.
thing.
That's stand-up. They're like, oh, it's when you make something up. And I'm like, you're literally, that's improv comedy.
You got the other two.
You've gotten all the other forms of comedy. And I'm like, no, it's the third one. And they're like, there's a third one?
At that point, do you just like shake your head and sigh and say SNL, you dolts?
Exactly. I go, it's like SNL. And then I always get the same response. Oh, skits.
Is there a difference to you between a skit and a sketch?
I think absolutely. I think a skit it's what you perform in, a college class when you're trying to do a project or something. You might do like a short scene. It's like a short skit to get a point across. It's not like, I feel like it's almost, I don't know, it comes across as a little like, oh, you just do skits.
Gotcha.
At least to me, and I feel like a lot of comedians, it's like a sketch is like a proper kind of professional performance.
Okay.
A skit's like 5-minute thing for fun.
Okay.
Yeah, so if a skit is just this, a quick little thing for fun, walk us through like beyond the thing they do on SNL. What's a sketch? What are you making out there?
So usually when you sit down to write a sketch, there's 2 ways you can start it. You can either choose, you could think of like a weird environment or a weird world with an unusual thing. For example, like you could say, okay, in this world, when people meet, they hit each other in the face, and that's the truth of this world. And then you create a scene where you just put random people in this unusual world and let it play out. That's one way you could kind of start it. Another way is you could do it based on characters. You could say, okay, I have this one guy, Steve. He hits people in the face when he meets people. And then I have...
People don't like Steve.
And then I have Jessica, who really hates when Steve comes to the office and says hello. So you have like... That's another way. It's a character based.
Jessica, who always has a black eye.
Oh, no.
Okay, I like that. And so you come up with this idea, and then you just sort of like workshop it until you find what works and what hits.
Yeah, so you usually have a clear punchline or a clear ending. And you want to, because a sketch is somewhat shorter than like a piece of theater, you only have really 5 minutes to start the scene, raise the stakes, and then have that punchline at the end. And what you do is you write it, you bring it into a writer's room where usually there are like 6 to 10 people, other writers working on scenes. You read through it and people will decide, oh, this is funny, you could do this better. And then it's a process of going back, rewriting it, and keep doing it and editing and until it's kind of that final product that you're ready to perform.
Gotcha.
Okay.
If you had to bullet point, like, and I'm putting you on the spot here, but let's see what happens. If you had to do like 3 do's and 3 don'ts for an effective sketch, like what are the... And obviously I'm sure that it's not as clear cut as that all the time, but like if you were being very broad, what are things that will make a sketch good, reliably, and what are things that are going to make it tank?
Yeah, okay. Well, usually a good sketch has clear, distinct characters. Even if you're doing what I was talking about, like a weird environment, you want to know the difference between person A and person B. If they're just the same, they're really just not doing anything for the scene.
Gotcha.
You want to have a clear rate. You want the stakes to be continuously rising throughout the sketch. You can't go from, you can't just have a scene in a grocery store where it's like, some funny thing happened that's very ordinary. You want it to rise to the point where it's like, oh, wow, that I didn't see that coming. That's a really funny punchline. So you want that clear punchline. Trying to think. Oh, this is one that gets a lot of people. Shorter is a lot better. There's tons of sketches or scenes you could have where people don't know how to make it concise. So it could go for like 10 pages and you just explain the joke away.
Right.
Keep it. People know when it's funny. The audience will react. You don't need to have like paragraph after paragraph.
Right.
I guess those are 3 key pieces.
Yeah.
Okay.
That last bit just reminded me, one of my favorite groups of people making online stuff they're a Canadian sketch group called Loading Ready Run. And, for a long time they were doing weekly, like usually 3 to 5 minute sketches that they would put out. They have, in the past few years, stopped doing that. They've been focusing on a lot more like continuous content and doing streaming, but they still have a run of things called crap shots that are like 30-second to a minute long, like one joke and it's done kind of things. And they are reliably some of the funniest stuff being made on the internet. Like you're saying, if you can get it down to the point where it's nice and short and sweet. Yeah, I have been to some comedy shows with some bits that have not been strong enough to hold the length of what they were being asked to hold.
And that brings up an interesting point, actually, and that's there are kind of different formats for sketches, where like a blackout sketch is where you have that one-liner, it blacks out. A runner sketch is it runs throughout the performance. You might have the blackout scene reoccurring throughout different sketches.
Interesting.
So there's different kind of ideas. Okay, like what type of sketch do we want? Do we want it's one unusual person, everyone else is normal? Do we want one normal person, everyone else unusual? It really changes depending on your format.
Very cool. That's probably enough on like what a sketch is. If you're still unclear, like go watch Loading Ready Run or any given SNL bit. Like
watch Key and Peele.
Watch Key and Peele. Watch
all
old Keenan
that
and Kel sketches. Yeah. There's a lot out there, and it's fun.
It's not stand-up comedy.
It's not, and it's not improv. SNL, while they use improv as a writing tool, what you are seeing on the television are scripted sketches. That is just a common misconception that I hear, because like SNL comes out of an improv background, but that's not improv comedy. It's sketch comedy. But we're a gaming podcast, so we're going to bring this around to video games a little bit. And
what up, gamers?
Hey, what's up? So we're gonna talk a little bit about these ideas that JP has brought up about what makes a good sketch and where that kind of mindset can be seen in game design. When we were texting about this episode, like the first thing that popped into my head that I think might be fun to dive into was dungeon design, level design, specifically in something like a dungeon in The Legend of Zelda, or a level of something like Mega Man or Sonic or Shovel Knight. And what I mean by that really is like if you look at a game level, frequently in the kinds of games that I was just laying out, you're going to have multiple discrete... I'm going to use the word dungeon because it's a good word for this. That really applies more to Zelda, but I'm going to just like, let's keep our terms consistent. You will have multiple dungeons, which are the areas in which like the main challenges of the game are, each with its own sort of theming and each with its own sort of idea behind it. So, like, in Zelda, those dungeons are, like, you have a water dungeon where there's lots of puzzles about manipulating the water level, or there's a fire dungeon where you have to find ways around fiery obstacles. And the reason that this popped in my head is it's very much that idea you had, JP, of, like, you want to come up with whatever your, like, core idea of the sketch is. That, like, what's weird about this world? In a lot of games that approach level design this way, each dungeon will contain an item or a power-up or an ability that you get that kind of solves the dungeon for you. To use Zelda as an example, in like, I'm trying to use Link from the Past, but it's been so long since I played Link from the Past that I'm forgetting the specifics of it.
Yeah, that you forgot the title.
Yeah. Did I say Link from the Past?
Yes.
You gotta go back, Link.
You gotta go back to the past.
Oh my god. Okay, here's
sorry, I completely threw you off.
You're fine. Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. The first proper dungeon of that game is a volcano dungeon, and it's all about like there's a lot of puzzles and a lot of challenges based around like navigating around lava.
Yeah.
The midpoint of that dungeon, the item you find is a grappling hook, which suddenly opens up a whole new way of navigating and allows you to reach areas of the level that were previously inaccessible. That is a very core tenet of the Zelda game design, and it's a core tenet of a lot of games that share this kind of like level design as core gameplay piece. And that to me feels very much the same way that like both in the good and bad ways you were talking about sketch comedy, like they have their clear idea, they have like, it's not a punchline, but there is a point to the level that you get, and then you have to get to the point of like, okay, I can now solve these puzzles reliably. But also sometimes you run into ones where like maybe it's a little too long. Maybe there's a little too much dungeon for a punchline, a problem solution that is not quite engaging enough to keep you going all the way through.
I was just going to point out, and it's also that journey through the dungeon. You might not get to that point, you know, you might not find that grappling hook the first time. You might have to go down a few wrong corridors, get caught in the maze. And that's really kind of, you could think of that as the sketch writing process. You don't find that punchline immediately. You have to take those wrong turns and realize, okay.
You get several game overs, you bomb in front of a few audiences, and then you figure out what makes the sketch work.
And then you reach that ending, and it all works out. You know, you get your master sword.
There it is. So the games that I was thinking of, Chris, and then I think once we get our games out, like in the open, we can kind of pinpoint the ones that we really want to talk about. But I was thinking of, first of all, I was thinking of Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, as JP was talking about sketch comedy.
Yes.
And then, like, as you were mentioning Sonic, I was thinking very specifically about, like, the last two Sonic games to come out, Sonic Mania and Sonic Forces, and the difference between those two.
Yeah, there's a lot to mine in the differences between those two.
Yeah. And then, finally, I just thought of Persona 5, because there are some dungeons with gimmicks that are really cool and are fun and are quick, and they constantly, like, raise the stakes. And then there are just as many dungeons that have really bad ideas and go on for way too long.
I want to jump in really quick because you put this in my head with your talk on Sonic. Can we talk about how Sonic Unleashed is basically one really bad through sketch? Like, you get a few really good levels of, like, Sonic going fast, but then it's constantly interrupted by, like, Jim in the corner of the writer's room was like, I want to do this one about the hairy man who fights.
How long is this sketch? Oh, it's an hour.
It's an hour, 5 times.
Oh my god.
Oh man. For those of you who haven't played Sonic Unleashed, it's...
half of the game is a really fun, like...
yeah, well, no, let's not be generous. A third of it is the best 3D Sonic game that's ever been. The other 2/3 is a cruddy God of War ripoff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me sad.
And
anyway.
So you have, like, these really fun levels where you are running really fast, and things constantly change. Like, 1 minute you will be running on the side of a building, the next you will be kind of weaving through what's essentially a racetrack.
Yeah.
And those levels are really fun.
It's the most responsive that 3D Sonic has ever been. Like, those
games...
what?
I will agree with that, actually.
Those levels in Sonic Unleashed are, to me at least, feel the best to play out of any 3D Sonic. Like, it's still got its own layer of jank, but...
I have a bias because, like, I have learned to get used to the jank in older Sonic games, but I will agree with you in that I think as far as 3D Sonic goes, Sonic Unleashed, when you are playing the good levels,
when you're playing really Sonic, it's great.
Flies by.
Yeah.
Hey, this guy's got jokes.
I do stand-up, you know.
No one else will get that reference anyway, but whatever.
So I cannot believe how many people don't know what sketch comedy is. I'm gonna be thinking about that forever.
But you know, you look at the Werehog levels. Those are the very slow plotting levels that play like bad God of War. Those levels involve you, like, having to stop to fight enemies. Like, the combat's not even creative. You are mainly just mashing 1 or 2 buttons.
Yep.
And
then when you're not doing that, you're doing very, like, slow plotting, uninteresting platforming challenges.
Yeah. And those levels go on for, like, 20 minutes on average. The final level is an hour.
It's a bad sketch.
It's a bad sketch. So yeah, like, that's Sonic Unleashed, and that is, I feel like you can basically say that is the problem of, like, most bad Sonic level design in a nutshell. It just goes on for too long with not enough interesting things going on.
I'm honestly curious to segue from this into your thoughts on, like, Mania versus Forces.
Okay, so yeah, Sonic Mania is really cool because it is an anniversary game, so it brings back a lot of old levels. And so in every classic Sonic game, a level is divided into 2 acts. Alright, so this is going to be a little weird to explain, but stick with me here. So Sonic Mania, when it brings back an old level, it kind of sums up that entire level in the first act. And then the second act introduces something new from a different level and incorporates that into...
It's sort of a remix of what... So, like, Sonic Mania, you get Area 2 is Chemical Plant Zone, which originally appeared in Sonic 2.
Yes. And so Chemical Plant Zone Act 1 is basically a combination of everything that was good about the original Chemical Plant Zone. But then when you get to Chemical Plant Zone Act 2, thank you, Chris, you got the ball rolling for me.
Yeah, I got you.
When you get to Chemical Plant Zone Act 2, the gimmick that they add is Bouncy Floors, which they took from Wacky Workbench from Sonic CD. It's this cool thing where, like, you get the thing that you like, and then they take something and add on top of that, and in a way that makes it work.
Which, to toss the ball back to JP, we were talking before we started recording about sort of how sketches get put together, and he mentioned something about, like, is that the kind of thing you would ever do, moving from, like, one show to another when you're making your adaptations?
Definitely. I mean, you know, if I'm performing in New York City versus Washington, D.C., one sketch might be so specific to D.C. It's, like, set in D.C., it's a D.C. type of humor, you know, like... The question, what do you do, comes up in DC a lot. And we have a scene that plays off that.
I feel that in my bones.
So that's like a huge thing in DC. But when you come to, you know, perform in Chicago or New York, that might not be as relatable because it's just not as common. So you're definitely going to adapt and choose, okay, these are the sketches that are going to make sense for this audience. And we might want to rewrite, you know, these few lines to make it specific to a Chicago audience versus a DC audience. So definitely that's present.
Tossing the ball back to Dylan. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was like,
oh,
aha,
no, it's perfectly
Segue.
Fine.
Buttery smooth.
No, that was interesting. I quite enjoyed that. Thank you. So yeah, I feel like I kind of mentioned everything I can about Sonic Mania, like, for the sake of brevity.
Yeah.
Then we look at Sonic Forces, and Sonic Forces is a game I really wish I liked more.
Sonic Forces is the most recent Sonic game. In it, you actually, like, create your own Sonic-esque character. If you want to laugh, like, just look up some of the horror shows that people have made in this medium.
I'm not even going to be looking at the fan character gameplay because I don't know how to explain it, and it's something that bothers me, and I wish I was more learned in game design, because something about the Sonic Forces levels feel off, but I can never really put my finger on what it is. But I think listening to JP talk about sketch comedy and me trying to think about what he's saying and applying that to video games, I think the problem with the Sonic Forces levels is that, you know, I talked about the Unleashed levels and how, like, you know, 1 minute you might be running on the side of a roof, or you might be literally running on water, and the next portion of that level, that sketch, quote unquote, is that you might go from running on water to tobogganing on a glacier or something like that.
You're talking about my favorite level in that game too.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great level.
That song in that level is so good.
Or, like, you know, a rooftop run. You might be literally running on rooftops, then scaling the side of a building to jumping from, like, balloon float to balloon float. And this is all stuff that not only is mechanically different, but also is aesthetically different. And, like, it gives this feeling of, like, change and evolution over the course of this level. It kind of tells a story in and of itself. Sonic Forces doesn't really have that. Yeah. Sonic Forces, at least the levels I played on my brother's Switch, is like you are running through a jungle, and now you're running through a jungle in 2D. And now you're running through a jungle, and, oh, that was kind of a cheap death. That didn't feel great. And then the level is over before anything really changes or evolves. Or maybe something does change, but the change comes way too late for it to really leave a lasting impact. I was going to bring it back to JP. Like, has there ever been, like, a sketch where that either you were writing or you were viewing where it kind of felt like it wasn't going anywhere? And then it started to, but, like, that was the punchline, and then, like, the whole thing just kind of fell flat. Like, don't use names, obviously, but...
No, call out your sketch enemies now.
So, I have had scenes kind of that I felt like hit the punchline and then continued going for, like, a long time.
without any new punchline to help that out.
Any new punchlines, where it's like, you know, it's great. It hits that punchline in, like, the first minute, and then it goes on for 10 more minutes.
Oh, no.
And you're just like, I guess it's like defeating the final boss in a game within, like, 5 minutes, and then suddenly it's like, well, you gotta keep going.
keep it going. To steal some terminology from one of my favorite online game talk people, Extra Credits, they did a really great episode several years ago on this idea of the distinction between differences in scale and differences in kind. So a difference in scale being like in any given like RPG, you have a sword and then you get another sword that hits harder. Like the only difference is one of magnitude. In that case of numbers, sometimes it can be in terms of like size. Whereas a difference in kind is like an actually qualifiably different experience. And what you were talking about, like what's good in Sonic Unleashed and what's good in Sonic Mania, is they provide a lot of differences in kind. They provide like you're doing one thing and then something changes and you spend a little while of that level doing something completely different, and then something else changes and now you're doing like a combination of those two things that you had to master. And like it's changing the script and keeping things fresh, as opposed to just like, here's a level, the next level is the same but longer. Like the next sketch is the same but the punchline is the same, but it takes us 5 minutes longer to get there. The build-up makes you laugh.
And I think going off that, it's really easy when you're writing sketches because to develop a sort of style of how you write sketches. And this affected me for a while, where I'd like, okay, this is how I open the sketch, and then it's going to go on in this format, and then we're going to reach the punchline. It's going to be a big twist. And then you realize, like, a month later, you wrote 10 sketches that have the exact same like progression.
Like if you draw out the interest curve, it's identical.
They're like identical. They're in different scenes. They're different characters. But if you really think about it, they're the same sketch, and it's really hard to get stuck in that trap.
Just want to throw a caveat out there. None of us are game designers. We're not trying to like hate on any of the people behind any of these games that we're like, they're not good. We ain't here being negative. We're just commenting on like what we were observing.
I'm reflecting on why, in the case of Sonic Forces, as a fan of this series, as a fan of this formula even, why this didn't really affect me the same way other levels have. And I do know people who like, you know, the first run through of this level, they didn't really care much for it, but like, you know, like with a lot of things, Sonic, with like repeated playthroughs and like trying to beat your time and get the best time and score chasing, they were able to get a lot more value out of that. So I guess, to continue with that caveat, like entertainment is subjective.
Yeah, no accounting for taste.
Persona 5 is what I was gonna mention next.
Dive in.
Hey, first of all, I'll just mention about the RPG loop. A huge appeal of Japanese RPGs in particular is that every time you go to a dungeon and you start exploring a dungeon, and I feel like this can also be applied to RPGs in general, not just in games, but like, or not just in video games, but in Dungeons and Dragons. You know, the appeal of dungeon exploring is that you are going through these caves, you are fighting enemies, and, you know, if you're lucky, and if the DM loves you, you will find loot and treasure that enable your characters to fight more effectively. Maybe that's just something as simple as your numbers increase. Or it could be something like, this is an amulet that gives you a special effect when you fight with lightning damage. I don't know. What I think Persona 5 does that's really cool is that it kind of adds to the loop with the gimmick doesn't sound right, but with the framing that you are Phantom Thieves and you are there to steal treasure. That gaming loop kind of evolves from that. So in the first dungeon of Persona 5, you are robbing a castle. And so a lot of the things is there's a lot of sneaking involved. You might have like some intricate puzzles involving going into the dungeons and like having to interrogate a guard there or something. I don't have a perfect memory of the dungeons of Persona 5 I want to throw out there. This is all based off of what I remember from playing the game 2 years ago now. What I'm thinking of specifically in terms of like levels that I liked is the second dungeon of Persona 5 has you robbing an art museum, and so that kind of starts with you like avoiding security cameras, avoiding very obvious traps, going around like surveillance lasers, and by the end of the dungeon it kind of evolves into you going through this massive like multi-layered safe where like you are like chipping away, like finding passwords to get into the next layer, and there's another safe and you gotta constantly like find new passwords and chip away at this safe's like defenses until you are finally in the core and you beat the dungeon. And then there's another dungeon where you're basically robbing a pyramid, like you are tomb raiding for all intents and purposes. Yeah, it's really cool. But like the best part about that dungeon is that it starts outside of the pyramid. You start off in the desert and you go to the local town, and I forget quite what you do there, but you're basically in this town investigating, trying to find a way into the pyramid. And then once you get in the pyramid, you're avoiding traps. You have to like find these amulets that allow you to go in deeper.
Dylan, I was just gonna say this is a perfect example of a sketch with way too many elements going on.
That's fair. But I think in terms of Persona 5, it is, like it's supposed to be a slow burn, whereas the sketch is supposed to be like laughter. And like don't drag that out, obviously.
It's also a good example though of the whole like you want to have that specific world in which your sketch takes place. And Persona, like, just by the virtue of like Persona being a game series where all of these dungeons you're going into are like in people's psyches, it does that very well. Like they're able to in universe justify having very specific and very like quirky and interesting starting points for these levels before they even get into the actual design of them. Like just the aesthetic that they're going for can be such a great jumping off point for them.
Yeah, like what are the, I'm gonna tie in theater here, wait for it, given circumstances.
Hey, we used that term on this show before.
Of the environment.
We did it.
Like specifically the dungeons that I've been talking about, or
well, I mean, what's kind of interesting here is like these dungeons are influenced not just by the given circumstances of like the story this far, but on the given circumstances of the characters that you are sneaking in. Like the first one that you were talking about with like the castle, the character that this castle is the psyche of sees himself as a king of the school. He's a teacher, gym teacher. What is he again?
He's a gym teacher.
Yeah, and
he's
he
like
views himself
coach.
as like the king of the school, and so his psyche is a castle. The person who the art museum belongs to is a famous painter. Like they're able to like weave together like the character backstory and the situations of the world into these like level designs, which is a very cool thing.
I just realized I conflated two of the dungeons, but it's fine.
It's okay.
Yeah, I don't think anyone really cares, and if they do, sorry.
Hey, we have listeners.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I guess like JP was saying, like there is a danger of adding too much to a level, and I think that is shown way better in the later dungeons when you're nearing the end of the game. So I guess late game spoilers if you haven't played Persona 5. There is a level that is a space station, and I won't talk about the given circumstances, but like it's basically the Death Star. And
what the fuck?
This is a very confusing game.
It makes sense in context. You're just gonna have to take my word for it. Like the guy. No, you know what? Never mind. I won't talk about the plot. I'll just talk about the level. You are in a space station, and
got it.
I can't remember a lot of the early level. That's the problem. This was a very forgettable dungeon. But problem is like near the end of the level, there are these segments where you are kind of going out through a port, and you are letting gravity. You know that scene in Revenge of the Sith, Star Wars Episode 3, where like General Grievous. I hope you've been thinking about these characters lately.
That's my favorite movie, so
Of course. I'm sorry.
Where General Grievous just kind of like breaks a hole in through like the station that he's in,
like,
and like
goodbye.
he's sucked out by gravity, and then he like re-enters through like another location.
Yes.
Okay. That is kind of.
No, I can picture this scene. I wish I couldn't, but I can.
That is the gimmick of like the last stretch of this dungeon, and it is so confusing. Like you're not even really being a thief. You are like, I enter through this door, and this door will lead me to this part of the station, and now I need to go from this part of the station to another part of the station, and you just kind of need to have like this spatial awareness, but to the point where it's like fatiguing. And like you don't do that once, you do that like 3 or 4 times.
Gross.
And dude, I do not like it.
I want to jump in as a palate cleanser with a bit of level design from a game that I do very much like, that talking about Persona made me think of.
Okay.
There is an older platformer game from Double Fine called Psychonauts.
Oh, yeah.
Play Psychonauts if you've never played Psychonauts. The premise of the game is you play a young boy named Raz who ran away from the circus to join a psychic summer camp and learn how to be a psychic soldier called a Psychonaut. And just like Persona, you spend the game like all of the levels are different people's subconsciouses. You go into like sleeping people's dreams to solve this mystery and influence them and like fix things. It's very surreal. It's got a very like Tim Burton-esque art style, but they really lean into this like every level and every person's level and psyche has its own quirks and its own ways of interacting with it. The best example of which is you go into this guy's mind, and this guy's like a conspiracy theorist. He thinks that there's spies everywhere. The conceit of the level is like, it's this like disjointed, think like a Stepford Wives neighborhood where like everything is perfect and suburban, but like it's on platforms floating in space. So you have to like jump from platform to platform, but then there are areas that are being blocked off by like these secret agent dudes in like trench coats and hats, but they're trying to blend in very ineptly. And so like there'll be a bunch of guys in like brown trench coats and fedoras standing around an open manhole holding plungers and talking disjointedly about sewage, or standing around like a front yard that you have to get through holding spatulas and saying things like, I too love grilling the meat. And you have, in order to get through them, you have to explore the level and like find the items that they're holding so that you can carry the item and they will think you're one of them and you can bypass the challenge. And like that level makes me laugh more than any sketch I've ever watched, because it's like, it's such a perfect like,
what a slap to the face.
yeah, JP, your art form is trash. No, like,
This is a trap.
no, but like that level feels like a good piece of sketch comedy to me, because like it's, you immediately are able to grasp like the rules under which the world is operating. The characters are very distinct, and like when you figure things out, it just like the absurdity of what you have to do to successfully navigate this is like a great punchline. I love that. I love Psychonauts. Go play Psychonauts, everybody.
Okay.
I guess the question is, how long does the level last?
Not terribly. It's not one of the shortest levels
Well,
in the game,
when,
but like
when you don't know where to go, like
Yeah,
when I was first going through it, it was pretty long.
it's one of the more rambly levels, because like some of the levels in Psychonauts are very like you go straight through and like it's a challenge gauntlet. This level is more of a like you have to explore the space and figure things out,
Yeah.
which means it takes a little bit longer, but as a counterbalance, it is a like, if you know what you're doing, it's one of the shortest levels in the game.
Gotcha.
So like it can drag a little bit, but like I was having too much fun listening to just like a shadowy government agent holding a plunger saying feces. Just like I was having too much fun in the space to care that it was taking me too long.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know I've been on Persona 5 for a little bit, but
It's
I
okay.
do want to
Hit
address
me.
one of the second to last dungeon. Spoilers. It's a cruise ship, and that's really cool as an idea for
Just one quick question, Dylan.
Oh yeah, go
I
ahead.
just want to make sure I got this straight. It's been in a pyramid, a spaceship, and
Okay.
now a cruise ship?
So JP, you've seen Inception, right?
I have.
That's
It's
Persona.
basically Inception.
Yeah, all
Oh.
all of these are like the subconsciouses of people that you're
Oh,
interacting
okay,
with.
okay. I'm like, whoa.
Okay, yeah.
It's a globe-trotting adventure.
Like I get where your confusion lies, and I'll bury it right now
let's
by
let's
being
assuage
like,
that.
yeah, you're on a cruise ship, and so a lot of it is just like, because like there's a very the villain of this cruise ship is like very classist, and so a lot of it is like talking to NPCs to try to get the clearance to go to the next section. And that alone would be fine if like that wasn't the entirety of this like 5-6 hour dungeon. And
5 or
like
6 hours is long for any dungeon.
to be fair, the game loop is supposed to be I do a little bit of the dungeon, I leave the dungeon, and I do some other stuff before I go back into the dungeon. But the way
like a
I was
runner
playing this
sketch.
game,
Yeah, it's a run. Holy crap! Yeah, Persona dungeons are runner sketches. We got there.
hey, it's
Tied it back.
That one actually was a smooth segue and not just me pretending.
But yeah, exactly. But like the way I've been playing these dungeons in this run through Persona 5, I would complete the dungeon first, and then I would do all the awesome side stuff that the game will then allow me to do. But I guess the big problem is like there's a lot of gimmicks where it's like there's a gimmick where like you can't go through any of these hallways, and so like you have to use a statue to shrink yourself to mice and like scurry around and to get to the next area, and there's like 5 of those. And then after that or in between like each of those segments, you have to talk to yet more NPCs. So it's this kind of feeling of back and forth where like it's the same thing except longer now. And I think that kind of ties back to what you were saying earlier about like the sketch kind of reached its punchline, but then it like kept going, and it was more or less the same thing. It was just a repetition of the same joke over and over again.
It introduced everything right at the beginning and then didn't have anything to shake it up as the time was going on.
Yeah, it's
Gotcha.
just the same thing but longer. But it's in its mind, it's like trying to build up to the ultimate punchline, because like in terms of the game world, the stakes are like at an astronomically high level. I guess the mentality was it has to build up to a really big moment, but they only had so many ideas that carried them so far.
Right.
I had something. It doesn't really relate to level building, though.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
okay?
Is that okay? Should I stay
that's
on that
fine.
topic?
No, that's fine.
No. This is about video games.
Yeah,
and Sketch.
Video games, Sketch.
Perfect.
Whatever you want to hop in on.
You're the Sketch man. Anything you want to talk about goes.
So I had like a perfect when I think about like what video game describes a sketch, and I think we were talking about this, is if you've ever played Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering, these sort of deck building games, I feel like that is a perfect example of building a sketch, because
I've played a lot of Magic the Gathering in my day.
So Hearthstone is a video game, so it counts.
And we've talked about tabletop
we've talked
games
about
before,
tabletop
so
games too.
Magic is fair game.
So basically, it's you have to, you're choosing to construct your deck in a specific way, and it has a specific end goal. Usually, it's some sort of combo where you're going to, do 50 damage at the end and destroy your opponent.
Quick, just jump in case anyone doesn't know. Magic the Gathering is what is called a trading card game or collectible card game, in which you put together a deck using these different cards that are released at regular intervals, and they, you fight your opponent's deck. And so theoretically there are infinite different variations of decks that you can build. Play the game. I'm not gonna, like, I used to be a Magic judge. I could go real deep on the rules. That's not good podcasting. There are plenty of podcasts about Magic out there that you can go listen to if you want to do that. Anyway, back to you, JP. Sorry.
So yeah, you normally construct your deck, and then you go into battle against whoever you're playing against, and it either works or it doesn't. And then it's pretty. You either win or lose, and that's really much like when you perform a sketch. People either laugh or they don't. You usually try it, 2 or 3 times, because sometimes the other person's deck just is built to counter yours. Or if I tried my Washington DC sketches in Chicago, if the audience didn't laugh, it doesn't mean it's not funny. It just means it's not.
Maybe it relies on something that the
Yeah.
Chicago crowd was not familiar with.
Yep, exactly. So you have to go back and you rebuild and edit your deck or rewrite your sketch until you have that deck that performs 75% win rate.
I love this because it introduces the idea of a sketch comedy metagame. I now need, like, competitive head-to-head
Like-
sketch shows.
Like, you got matchups, you got tier lists.
Oh my gosh.
Now I'm
and for those
thinking
of
of
you who
like
don't know,
competitive Pokemon.
Yeah, metagame describes, like, in any competitive game, these sort of, like, extra level of, like, in a fighting game, it's like, okay, what fighters have the best frame data? Like, what fighters have the most active frames of animation at which they can act?
If I do this strong attack, I leave myself vulnerable for this long.
Yeah.
Or if I am playing against this type of character, they are really good at reflecting projectiles that I send at them.
Yeah. Or in Magic, it frequently comes down to kind of a rock, paper, scissors of, like, well, if I play, like, my aggro burn deck where I'm just, like, dropping a lot of tiny creatures and trying to hit you directly with damage, that'll work fine against, like, the combo player that's trying to stall the game out. But if I go up against, like, the guy playing the, like, middle of the road deck with all the answers, that's not going to work. So, like, how many of all these different decks are in the pool that I'm going to be playing against? Metagame is a complicated topic that I actually now really want to do a whole episode on.
A metagame is essentially, like, I can play to the best of my ability, but, like, how much easier can I make it for myself?
Yeah,
by knowing just, like, how the game is designed.
I don't know how to do it, but I desperately want us to do an episode on metagame.
I don't play any games competitively, so that will be really hard.
I used to play Magic competitively, and I kind of played League competitively, so I'll figure something out. Anyway, I wonder if that opens up. So there's this idea in various areas of the Magic the Gathering community of something that is referred to as Magical Christmas Land.
Okay.
Which is the beautiful moment when, like, you're going to lose. Your deck is not working. You're at the end of the rope, like, you're dead next turn, and then you draw, and, like, a thing that wins you the game that is not at
Exodia
all
the Forbidden One.
But like, no, see, Exodia isn't, because Exodia is like what that deck was meant to do.
I know.
In Yu-Gi-Oh.
I'm fucking around.
Yeah, in Magic the Gathering, it's like there's a podcast that I listen to called North 100, which is it's from Loading Ready Run, and it's a bunch of guys talking about a specific Magic format. But they recently did an episode on Magical Christmas Land where they were talking about how this guy won a game because he had 4 incredibly powerful cards that he basically turned into an infinite loop to win off of an extremely mundane mechanic. He was able to just like repeat the same thing over and over again and use an incidental fact of that recursion to win the game when he should not have. Have you ever experienced any Magical Christmas Lands in sketch comedy when like you're bombing and things are going terribly and then something just happens that saves the day?
I mean, I guess, yeah, there have been times where a sketch just isn't performing how it's supposed to, and then some sort of human error, or an actor makes some sort of, they mess up somehow in a way that it wasn't supposed to be funny, but a word comes out differently than you think it would come out, and suddenly the sketch is funny. I think really, though, this Magical Christmas Land really applies to, I'm not sure if it could apply within a sketch as much as, okay, that sketch didn't work, but the next sketch, like the entire, usually have a lineup of like 10 sketches, let's say. If the first 9 bomb, but then your 10th one's really good and it kills it, at least, you end on that high note.
Okay,
and
yeah.
The audience leaves remembering that last sketch.
Gotcha.
I had one quick thing.
Hit me.
And that's because, just Dylan, you mentioned Pokemon, and I was actually thinking about this morning, and how, normally in Pokemon, you go to a gym, and you have to battle, a gym leader who has a specific type of Pokemon. And, you normally have like 4 or 5 main Pokemon in rotation, and that's really a good way of thinking of, when we travel to perform, we have like a pool of 20, 30 sketches we choose from, but depending where we're performing, we're going to choose the 5 or 6 that we think are going to be specifically strong for this area. And I think that is a good relation with Pokemon and going into battle. And that's
Chicago is weak against fire type sketches.
Chicago is
actually
weak.
that'd be Cleveland and Lake Erie.
Yeah. I think that'll probably do it for us. We can wrap on that note. Thank you so much for joining us, JP.
I'm sorry, people who were excited to hear me talk about Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. Maybe another time.
I'm sure we'll loop around.
I know.
JP, do you want to throw out any plugs for anything, anywhere people can find your stuff?
Yep, so check out Bad Medicine Comedy. We are performing in D.C. We're right now at Chicago Sketch Fest. If you hear this, which you won't, we're performing tonight.
You'll be hearing this 2 days after Chicago Sketch Fest ends, probably.
We'll be here next year, so check us out, Bad Medicine Comedy. It's been great. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, dude, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, couple other quick announcements. We mentioned this last week, or 4 days ago when you hear this, but Dylan is going to be on a arc of the podcast Unexplored Places. We got the name in one this time.
Christine,
it's
I'm sorry.
done by our good friend Christine. It is an actual play podcast. It's a lot of fun. Be on the lookout for Dylan there soon. I also mentioned that I am appearing in the last episode of a podcast project called Unwell. I said in the episode that we recorded on Thursday that it was coming out sometime in February, and then on Friday morning their Twitter announced that that Unwell is now out on Apple Podcasts. So I was wrong. It is they've released episode 1. I'm in episode, I want to say it's episode 8. I think it's an 8-episode season. Either way, it's set to be a really cool show. It's spooky and funny, and go check out Unwell. I think that's it for announcements. We've been Backstage Gaming. We've really enjoyed having you here. We hope you enjoyed sort of us shaking it up and bringing on a guest this week. If you like what you hear, please feel free to check us out at bsgpod.com. That's our website. You can find bios. You can find all of our episodes. You can find a contact link. And yeah, that is your one-stop shop for all things us. You can't actually buy anything there. We have no merch.
But maybe one day.
Dylan, social me.
Yeah, all right. So we got...
That's your go-to now.
So we have a Facebook. We have Twitter. Our handle is at BSG_cast. We have a YouTube. And if you like us or want to talk about us, we really recommend that you use the hashtag BSGPod. If you like our artwork that we have up on our site, that was done for us by our friend Brennan French. If you like his art, you can check out his Squarespace at brennenfrench.squarespace.com. That is BRENNEN-French.squarespace.com.
And as always, thank you to BioQuery for the use of our theme song, Sound Radio Volume 1 Instrumentality. Check him out at soundcloud.com/BioQuery. That's soundcloud.com/BIOQUERY. He's also on Spotify, and he just posted something on Instagram yesterday about having dropped a new EP. So, go check that out. He makes a lot of cool, weird electronic beat boop sounds. Thanks again for listening. Please spread the word. Please help us grow. Please tell people that you know and that you like about our show, and tell them that you like it as much as you like them. Maybe more. Depending on who they are, maybe don't include that last part.
I mean, do they self-identify as a gamer?
Don't share with them. Thank you all again for listening. I'm Chris.
I'm Dylan.
And
that's
I'm
JP.
And thank you again. We've been Backstage Gaming. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye now.